Have you ever come across a question like how many windows are there in New York City? Or how many golf balls can fit in an airplane? Most people think maybe if I give a funny or a clever answer, that's what the interviewer wants. But that's not true. What they're really looking for is your ability to estimate logically with very little information. This is called a guesstimate. Estimating something by making meaningful progressive guesses. But why does this even matter? These questions are very common in interviews for roles like data analysts, product managers, consultants, investment bankers, data engineers, and management trainees. Basically, any role where the company wants to assess your analytical thinking and structured problem solving. Let me show you how this applies in the real world. A consultant might need to find how big is the pet grooming market in India to help a client decide on an investment. A product manager needs to estimate how many users will adopt this feature in the first few months. A data analyst often has to project website traffic with limited samples rather than complete data. In these scenarios, precise numbers aren't available. What matters is your ability to create a structured, logical story with the information you do have. This is exactly why guesstimate questions are so valuable in interviews. So, in this video, I'll teach you a clear step by step process to solve any guesstimate question. How to use supply side and demand side approaches to structure your answers. We will also solve a guesstimate problem together. And finally, some tricks that will help you stand out in your interviews. Here's the proven process you should follow. Step 1. Listen to the question very carefully. Take your time. Make sure you understand exactly what's being asked. Step 2. Ask clarifying questions. If someone asks what's the market size of coffee in India, clarify whether they mean revenue or number of cups sold. Step 3. Create a framework. Break the problem into smaller logical components. For example, to estimate coffee revenue, start with the population, narrow down to the percentage of coffee drinkers, estimate the average number of cups consumed in a day, and multiply that by the average price per cup. Step 4. Walk through your framework systematically. For each step, explain your reasoning clearly. For instance, you could say something like this: India has 1.4 billion people. Let's assume around 40% are adults. Of those, perhaps 20% drink coffee daily. I'm using 20% because tea is more popular in India, so coffee consumption will be lower. Notice how I provided reasoning without being prompted. Step 5. Use clean numbers. Round figures for simplicity. Use 70% instead of 68% or 1.4 billion instead of 1.37 billion. This keeps calculations straightforward and helps you work around with larger numbers. Step 6. Draw from real life experiences. Show practical knowledge. If asked about pizza sales in a city, you might say, based on what I observe in my own hostel, weekend orders roughly double compared to weekdays. Step 7. Defend your reasoning confidently. If challenged by the interviewer, stand your ground but respectfully. Explain to them why you think your approach is correct. Step 8. Be receptive to feedback. If given new information or assumptions, adapt smoothly and recalculate. If they suggest a better assumption, consider it and try to incorporate it in your framework. Step 9. Deliver your final answer with confidence. When you reach your final answer, have a quick go through and summarize clearly. You could say something like this: Based on my assumptions, the annual coffee market in India is approximately X billion rupees. And finally, remember, the interviewer isn't focused on your final number. What truly matters is your approach, clarity, and logical reasoning. When solving an estimate, you can approach it from two perspectives: the demand side approach and the supply side approach. The demand side approach starts with the consumers. You ask, how many people want this product? How frequently do they use it? What quantity do they consume? This method calculates the total market demand. The supply side approach begins with the businesses or providers meeting that demand. You ask how many suppliers exist, what's each supplier's capacity, what's their combined output. This approach determines the market size by summing up what suppliers can provide. Both the approaches are equally valid. They simply tackle the problem from different angles. The most impressive strategy in an interview is to cross check both methods. When your results from both approaches align, it demonstrates the soundness of your reasoning. Okay, so let's solve a guesstimate together. The question is, what is the annual revenue of tea in India? For this, I will be using a demand side approach, starting from the consumers, their consumption patterns, and then calculating total revenue. So, first, let's make sure we understand the question. They are asking about annual revenue, which means total money spent on tea in India in 1 year. One clarifying question I'd ask is, do we include only tea sold in shops, stalls, and cafes, or also tea made at home? For these interviews, they typically mean commercial sales, so we'll assume we are focusing on tea sold by vendors, cafes, and restaurants only. Our framework will be: we start with India's population, determine the percentage of tea drinkers, estimate the average cups consumed per day, calculate the average price per cup, and multiply cups per day into price into 365 days into number of tea drinkers. This calculation will give us the annual revenue. So India has about 1.4 billion people and tea is extremely popular in India. So let's assume 70% of the population drinks tea at least occasionally, giving us approximately 1 billion tea drinkers. While some people don't drink tea daily and others consume multiple cups, let's estimate an average of 1 cup per person per day across the country. This gives us 1 billion cups daily. Prices vary widely. Roadside stalls sell tea for 10 rupees, while cafes might charge 50 rupees. Since most tea is sold at roadside stalls, let's use an average price of 12 rupees per cup. So 1 billion cups per day into 12 rupees into 365 days gives us 4.38 trillion rupees or 4.38 lakh crore rupees. Instead of saying 4.38 trillion rupees, I'd say around 4.4 trillion annually. That keeps things clean. I would explain to the interviewer that this estimate makes sense practically. For example, in an Indian city, you'll see tea stalls every 200 to 300 meters. In offices and colleges, tea is consumed multiple times a day. So, assuming 1 cup per person per day is actually conservative. If the interviewer asks why 70% tea drinkers, I'd say tea is the most consumed beverage in India. While urban youth might prefer coffee, rural and small towns overwhelmingly drink tea. That's why I picked 70%. If the interviewer says, what if the average is 2 cups per day, not 1? I'd smoothly adapt and say, if we consider 2 cups per day instead, our revenue would double to approximately 8.8 trillion rupees. Regardless of which, we are still looking at a multi trillion rupee market, highlighting just how enormous the tea industry in India is. Finally, I would conclude, so, based on my assumptions, the annual revenue of tea in India is roughly 4.4 trillion rupees. Of course, the exact number doesn't matter. What matters is the logical approach and clarity of reasoning. So, in this example, while my estimate may not be the exact number, the real takeaway here is the process. If you structure your assumptions, stay logical, and defend them well, you can crack any guesstimate with confidence. Okay, so before we wrap up, here are some tricks to keep in mind to ace your interviews and stand out from other candidates. Structured thinking. This is the foundation of every guesstimate. When your thinking lacks organization, interviewers become confused. However, when you are structured, breaking the problem into clear logical steps, you immediately appear confident and methodical. Remember the 3 V's. No matter how brilliant your logic is, if you can't communicate it effectively, the interviewer won't understand it. Focus on these 3 V's. Voice. Speak clearly at a steady pace and avoid mumbling or rushing. Veracity. Be honest about your assumptions. When you're making an educated guess, state it confidently. Honest confidence beats false precision every time. Vocabulary. Use simple, precise language. Rather than saying a very big number, say approximately 1 million. Clear communication transforms your thought process into something that appears sharp and professional. The FOGAP framework. When you're stuck or confused on how to start a guesstimate, remember this simple acronym: P for population, H for household, U for urban versus rural, G for gender, A for age, I for income, and P for penetration. This framework provides multiple angles to approach any guesstimate question easily. The truth about answers. Here's something that will calm your nerves. There is no single correct answer in a guesstimate. One person might estimate the coffee market in India at 20 billion rupees, while another might calculate 15 billion rupees. Both can be correct as long as their approach is structured, logical, and evidence based. The interviewers aren't testing your calculator skills. They are asking, can you tackle a vague problem and solve it like a business leader? So focus less on the final number and more on building a convincing, realistic analysis. And if you are able to do all this, you will surely be completing any guesstimate that comes your way. Because at the end of the day, it's not about the exact number you reach, it's about how you think, how you structure your logic, and how confidently you explain your reasoning. And this is just the beginning. I will also be making videos on multiple guesstimate questions across all categories so that you get hands on practice and know exactly how to approach each type in an interview. Until then, thanks for watching.